uh, obviously every event I do and have done since March has been virtual, and I think we're all getting used to it, and it has been a great way to reach people. But the subject title, I just want to explain a bit as to why we said 2040, what were the drivers. But I want to start by, I guess, paying tribute really to the agricultural bill. And I think it's enormously poignant that today, Remembrance Day, is when the bill becomes the Agricultural Act. Now, it took 2 world wars to shape the Agricultural Act of 1947, and it transformed the way we were producing food. And that was because we learned the lessons, and Europe was starving, we'd faced rationing, and we wanted to change things. And I do think it's very significant that the bill has become an act on Remembrance Day. And I think there will be many people of the past that gave their lives who will be focusing on the future. And I feel that is a very strong spiritual pull at the moment. The bill will shape our farming futures for decades to come. There is no doubt about that. And trade will shape it even more. And it is why we at the NFU lobbied so long, so hard, built a coalition like no other coalition, all environmental NGOs, all farming organizations, consumer groups, consumers, chefs, everyone. And it saw 1 million people sign the most, or one of the largest petitions in living memory. And finally, today, we've nailed down the Agricultural Act, and there will be a reporting process in there. The Trade Agricultural Commission will go on to the face of the trade bill. Now, this is critical to achieving net zero, because if we were just going to carry on and say, actually, trade can be dealt with behind the closed doors of DIT, Parliament will never see the light of day. We won't be able to influence our MPs to influence the future of trade. I think it was going to set us back enormously. And this really is the pivotal point as to whether we can or whether we can't, because we have to incentivize to achieve net zero, and we have to change our farming practice quite significantly. But the big win-win is that climate smart farming is really good for the business. It is really good for the countryside. It delivers on biodiversity, and it delivers on the environment. And the key point is that the environment and food production are absolutely intrinsically linked. Now, a lot of people have said, well, why did you go for 2040? Why not sit with the government target of 2050? And this was the Oxford Farming Conference, which effectively sets the scene for the rest of the year. So it was January 2019, working, of course, back then with Michael Gove. Certainly, how would we describe him? A political heavyweight is how I would describe him. He blasted into DEFRA. He breathed oxygen into it in an unprecedented way. I know when I speak to teachers, they sort of shudder at the changes that he made, but ultimately he's a reformer. And I felt very strongly that, and this is the challenge for a lobbyist, it is very easy to focus on effectively what you don't want or what you do want, but not having the solutions there. And we were very keen as a team to challenge the thinking, to challenge the status quo, and really recognizing that as a source of emissions, 10% currently agriculture of UK emissions, but a sink, that we could do something about it. And if you want to open doors, if you want people to say, well, how do you do that? Then you obviously have got to beat targets. And so that is why we said 2040. One, I wanted Michael Gove to wake up and think, wow, this industry, this is an exciting industry, and that message to travel across government. I also wanted the academic and scientific community to think, okay, how do they want to do that? And this strategy really, really worked. I remember sitting back down next to Michael Gove, and I turned to him and I said, so what do you think, Michael? And he looked at me slightly wide-eyed and he said, I think you're very brave. And of course, we were just on the cusp of the whole sort of Greta Thunberg movement and climate change just over the next few months, massively building momentum. And this extraordinary position that agriculture is in, that it is a source of emissions and it is a sink, it is in a totally unique position. And I think we'd all say for too long as an industry, we've been a reactive industry. We have a chance to get ahead and really, really show what we stand for and the fact that we can deliver carbon neutral food. Now, with the right incentives, I genuinely believe that we can deliver carbon neutral by 2040. Just back to trade again, there is no point in the UK achieving net zero in agriculture if we are just going to export our production and export our standards abroad. There is a real need for us to show a global leadership position. I think things, again, looking right across the world at what is happening, we've seen China commit to net zero. Now, 12 months ago, nobody would have believed that that would happen. We've seen President Biden rather than President Trump, and that will be a game changer too. When I was out in Washington with Caroline Fairburn at the end of last year, climate change was a banned subject effectively. Environment was sitting in economic growth, but climate change was not part of the discussion. So there is such a chance for the UK to lead here. And our thinking is very much around three pillars. So when I talk about climate smart farming, what actually do I mean by that? Well, I mean focusing on efficiencies, I mean focusing on productivity. Now, productivity is probably the most misinterpreted word of our time, because automatically people think that, well, they just want to produce more. Productivity is always interpreted as we'll just produce more of it. This, to be very clear, is not just about producing more. It is about increasing yield, but it is about decreasing the food production footprint. So it is about less chemicals. It is about less chemical fertilizer. It is fundamentally about entering into the middle of the field and focusing on what is going on in sustainable production of food and everything that goes with that. So if I look at the broadacre arable side of things, huge opportunity here. We were part of Tom Allen Stevens' Climate Change Champions, really sort of getting the arable sector to come together and show what they were doing. The Farming Minister, Victoria Prentice, joined that call, and she was visibly moved by these incredible case studies of what is going on. And when we look to the future, and Erin Fitzgerald, who many of you will come across in the US Farmers and Ranchers Association, that has led on the 30 harvest work. It's a fantastic video. I'd urge you to watch it. But what I am hearing all across the world is we've got to stop mining out of the middle of the earth, which we cannot replenish. And we've got to start doing things on top of the earth. We've got to start being able to grow sustainable products, not only just for food, but also for fibers as well. And on that call with the Climate Change Champions, there was some brilliant discussions. There was one farmer talking about the opportunities around milkweed to produce latex. I look at wool, massively devalued on the global market now, half the value that it would have normally. Why are we not looking to insulate our public sector buildings with wool, the fibers that we produce, so we can lead sustainable lives? If I look at the livestock sector, we would transform the livestock sector quite rapidly by focusing on efficiencies in animal health, better genetics, making sure that, again, we keep the same numbers of livestock. And this has been a point that we've been challenged on quite a bit, that, you should tailor production to consumption. Well, absolutely not, because the UK is one country that has a maritime climate, fairly unique. There are not many places like the UK that have the climate that we have, where you grow grass, where predominantly we are a grass-based extensive system compared to many other countries. And we really should be maximizing that. And what we are not consuming here, we should be exporting to other countries. So it's very much about focusing on, having a better business, but decreasing that food production footprint. And this, of course, is where the future policy comes in. But just to finish on the pillars, so first one, productivity, climate smart farming. Second one, it is about changing land use. It is about more trees. It is about larger hedges. It is about ever focusing on capturing more carbon. When I look at the capability of beetle banks and what they can manage to capture, there are many different ways of us capturing carbon, but we do have to embrace this. We do have to think that it is actually going to be very different. And thirdly, renewable energy and the bioeconomy. Enormous opportunity there. Again, this is where the main gains in delivering net zero will come from. But when I look to jumping back to trade again, what we have done to date that is also going to be part of delivering on net zero, our leadership on antimicrobial resistance, massive reductions that we have seen. So we are now leading the world on AMR and responsible use. We are focusing on a future that will leave, I think, high cost regulation here in the UK. If I take our poultry producers as an example, 16% of those costs are connected to European regulation. Now, do I think that will change? I don't actually think that will change. I think we can have smarter regulation, but I don't think it is going to change because the UK consumer is demanding all of those things. That's why you had 1 million people signing up to it. So this is going to be an iterative process that we are part of, and much as trade will shape the future, the environmental land management scheme will fundamentally shape the future as well. And it is why, and I'm sure, Charlotte, I'm just looking at my clock quickly because I know you'll be telling me to stop soon, but the environmental land management scheme has a real opportunity to pay for the public goods that ultimately the market is not going to be prepared to pay for. It is the mechanism by which we incentivize the change that will be needed. And earlier in the year, I chair the Farming Organisations Group, which the CLA, the TFA, and many other farming organisations across the country are part of. And we'd all been talking about delay in transition. And eventually it sort of occurred to me that it's crazy to keep calling for delay. It was deemed to be delaying the whole of Brexit. Why don't we all come together and co-design a white paper proposal for government for how we see a sustainable food and farming scheme looking like? And it gave us the chance to really input what those three pillars, how we feel that net zero will drive a future policy. And I'm really proud of the work that has come together with all of these organisations. So 10 organisations in all have signed up to it. And the other interesting thing is that I wanted to get away from a income forgone model to go to a points-based approach so that you have a platform in England that farmers want to farm from, animal health, better resource management, better data exchange, owning our evidence base. All of those things have to sit on that platform. And there isn't time to talk about it now, but it's been very well received in DEFRA. It is a one-stop shop. It is a whole farm approach, and it allows people to climb the escalator as to where they want to go. So it is rewarding where we are now with the baseline, but it is also incentivizing others as to where we need to go and allowing those that are there in a good place to climb higher and rapidly. George Eustace is going to be speaking to the industry towards the end of November. I'm really pleased now that they are talking about Sustainable Farming Initiative, that they are embedding a lot of this joined up industry approach into their thinking. And importantly, we've shared it with all the retailers and the supply chain as well, because I am conscious this is about the term of the next parliament, not this parliament. We have the budget secured for this parliament. We've got to look to the next parliament, and we've spent all the money. So we need to be focusing on a whole chain approach that is really united behind sustainable food production, that is determined to deliver on carbon neutral food, that is going to put clear blue water between ourselves and the rest of the world, that we can stand proudly behind an evidence base that is about our values of food production. And that, I believe, is an opportunity that the UK cannot afford to lose. We could have fought for the status quo and gone nowhere. We have one of the most prized markets on the planet, and my focus at all times has been keeping our farmers and growers as the number one supplier of choice, both to retail, but importantly to out of home and to procurement. and most importantly of all, to stop being the lazy exporters and become the progressive exporters that we need to be in the post-Brexit era. Charlotte, a whirlwind trip through. You can never cover everything you want, but a starter for 10.
Thanks, Minette. A couple of things I just want to clarify. You said you picked 2040 to be ambitious, to wake Gove up. That definitely works. But is it realistic, if you're being truthfully honest?
If you have the right policy in place, and it's been a very interesting journey to bring together this sustainable food and farming scheme, if that policy is in place, it is most definitely deliverable. And the thing is, Charlotte, talking to all the retailers, you know, people get very frustrated that red tractor assurance is always difficult. Farmers feel they're doing all of these things, and where is the return to the farm gate? You know, they don't see added value coming back to the farm gate. This is going to deliver and must deliver on earned recognition. So those things that the market isn't going to pay for, the new policy should be prepared to invest in. And I think carbon is a game changer for us. I really do. But it's the game changer that we choose to make it. So we can say, look, you know, this is difficult. We're going to stand back. We're going to allow others to do it to us. And one thing's for certain, we will export our production and our standards. Or do we face into it and say, we're the one industry that can do this, and we're going to do everything that we can to do it? Now, not every farm, and this is the key point, not every farm will get to net zero. But you're going to hear from farmers tonight, from estates tonight, who are already there, who are already doing it. So we know it's within the art of the possible already.
Okay, let's get a question. This comes from Nick Tabb. A meaningful increase in forestry, he says, has to be part of achieving net zero. However, it requires land currently being farmed, possibly not very productively, to change from farm to forest. How does the NFU encourage that change?
Look, I think when we talk about forestry, it's got to be commercial. It's got to be, to a certain extent, market driven. Forestry is very different to trees and woodland and hedges. So I think often they get muddled together. I mean, ourselves and the CLA and the CFA, and we had a lot of conversations about trees. All conversations seem to lead to trees, and all funding pots tend to lead to trees. But I think the key point was that, you know, we felt at the entry level, this is about woodlands, this is about shelter belts, this is about agroforestry. This isn't about forestry per se. But I think we've got to, as I said at the beginning, we've got to embrace change of land use, and landowners will ultimately see commercial value and growing commercial value ultimately in planting more forestry. But I think it's very important that it is commercially focused and that it fits with a wider strategy. I do, though, bring everything back to saying, look, trees are the easy bit. Trees are the easy bit. The difficult bit is the policy, the meticulous policy that will take us on the journey of the sustainable materials that we can produce, the fibers that we can produce, and the food that we can produce. And we cannot do one without the other. We have to have this symbiotic relationship, of which trees are a key part.
Tom Gribble says there's a huge amount of cost to becoming net zero. Will there be enough in the system to help move the industry there? The Clean Air Act, he says, is a big challenge, and currently there's not enough meat on the bones in most businesses to meet this task.
That's a very fair point. And as a companion piece to what we've done on the Sustainable Food and Farming Scheme, we've worked up a comprehensive paper on fairness in the supply chain, transparency in the supply chain, and sector by sector, what needs to happen. It is very different. But the costs are enormous. Regulation costs a lot of money, which is why I made the comment about poultry producers. And that has to be factored in. But what I was worried about with Elms, and to a certain extent still am, because I think, you know, I see sustainable farming as the long term. I do see that as absolutely pivotal in success, but we've got to make sure that we are trading fairly. Direct support ultimately dealt with volatility and resilience to a certain extent. It was there to manage that, and we are going to be losing it. So 50% by 2024 will have gone in cap monies by that time. So there's a lot of things that have to happen in order to make sure that we can complete this journey. And the fairness of the supply chain, I always make the point that no farmer wants to farm with direct support. Nobody does. But it's been a way of actually acting as a social payment in some areas, particularly in very disadvantaged areas with livestock. it has kept people on the land. But that era is ending, and so we've got to do things differently, and we've got to be prepared to interfere with the supply chain. When I look at how the US operates, it's very different to how we operate.
Two very quick questions. One from Rupert. Will we see the supermarkets supporting the ambitious 2040 net zero target, promoting British produce on the front shelf rather than the back? And also from Marion. You've made a good cause for more encouragement for organic farming. Would you like to see ELMS include incentives to convert more UK land to organic?
Look, organic must be market driven. End of. The worst thing that we do for organics is to over incentivize it without a market being there, because all that will do is lower the price. So for organic farming, it's got to be market driven, and then farmers and growers will respond to those market pulls. That is very, very clear. But if you incentivize it without a market at home and abroad, you really risk just putting downward pressure on price and ultimately crashing your market. The supermarkets, look, think back 20 years ago, think back a bit further than that, the days of BSE, foot and mouth. This industry was on its knees, and buying British meant absolutely nothing. I mean, what has happened since then has been meteoric. You've seen retailer after retailer commit to 100% British. We saw the co-op go to 100% across fresh and frozen. We've recently seen the new buyers of Asda commit to 100% British beef. That only leaves 2 retailers out there that aren't committed to 100% British. Retail has moved in seismic, gigantuan leaps towards British. And why is that? Because their customer base is demanding it. Why has Aldi, Aldi wants to get you in there to buy, nappies and other things effectively. What lever do they use? Buy British food. So we've never been, I don't think, in a better place with retail. That doesn't mean to say there isn't huge downward pressure on price, because we're living now with an unprecedented retail price war. But every retailer I speak to wants to be able to source more British food. And there's such an opportunity, particularly in the horticultural sector, to be growing much more of our fruit and veg. The challenge, the dangers come not in retail, in out of home, with a dishonest approach. And it's why the likes of McDonald's deserve massive plaudits for their huge investment in these very short, secure supply chains that ultimately, as Beth Hart said to me the other day, the only reason we could get back online so fast is our huge investment in our UK and Irish supply chains. We need that culture to travel across out of home and across procurement, where it is not prevalent at the moment.
We will come back to many of this. I know there are lots of questions waiting. I'm going to ask them all to all of the panelists at the end, so don't feel that I have forgotten you. I honestly haven't. Thank you very much. Let's move to our next speaker.